Yes, to our first topic of discuss today, in spite of the federal government's mantra of promising ease of doing business, the high cost of doing business, inefficient processes and procedures, and a litany of extortions at Nigeria's seaports, well, alleged extortions, have made the nation's gateway uncompetitive, resulting to an immense frustration for business operators and huge revenue losses for all stakeholders. Though a number of administrations have introduced reforms at various times over the years, the cost of doing shipping business at the ports, particularly in Lagos, has remained high, with no sign of relief in sight. To discuss this and, of course, other issues confronting the ease of doing business initiative of the federal government, I have joining me live virtually is the Chief Executive Officer, Managing Director of Cowrie Assets Management Limited, Mr. Johnson Chukwu. Good afternoon, Mr. Chukwu. How are you today?
I'm good. Good afternoon to you, and thank you for having me on your program.
Yes, thank you so much for your time too. Let's start with the ease of doing business initiative and how it concerns the port in particular. Let's stay with some port issues, all of the transactions around the port environment. We still see that the issues remain the same. So what is really happening? Give us an overview of this.
I think what is happening is that we've not seen a major reform in the port system. When we talk of the ports, I want to broaden it to include all the entry points, which is the land ports, the seaports, and the airports.
Yes.
But I believe we want to dwell more on the seaports, where the major chunk of imported goods and exports also go through. If you look at the seaports, you will realize that Nigeria has one of the worst logistics supply in terms of seaport among the West African countries. And a couple of things have added up to worsen the situation. One, you have multiple agencies of government at the seaports. During the Passengers government, efforts were made to harmonize the number of agencies at the seaports. And then Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala wanted to have a single agency at the seaport, but immediately she left, or that government left, those agencies that were excluded from the seaports kicked and got back into the seaports. So you have multiple layers of regulatory agencies that are at the seaport that frustrate the efficient operation of logistics services in the seaports. Added to that is that you have undersupply of infrastructure. When you talk about undersupply infrastructure, you look at, currently Nigeria does not have a deep seaport. In terms of the equipment you need to take out the goods from the vessels or the ship to the land is also very weak. And then you have to look at road infrastructure that takes product away from the seaport. All these things are factors that have made it very difficult for Nigerians to do business effectively and efficiently. And they all add up to the cost of doing business in the country and add to making Nigeria's investment environment unfriendly.
Very interesting way to start. Now let's stay with vehicle importation, which are the Tokumba vehicles and what's been happening with importers of this. We've had issues around tariff and all of that. Now, new vehicles are not just easy to just come by. Talking about price and all of that, Mr. Chukwu, only for few that can do that. We still go for the Tokumba vehicles. So what do you think? What policy do you think can help suit both ways for the vehicles, for the Tokumba vehicles, and also encourage the new ones? How do we go about this?
Okay, if you look at the issue of Tokumba vehicle, there have been disputation in the past few days on a reduction in tariff for the used vehicles, or what we call Tokumba. I think there was, according to Nigerian Customs, an unintended reduction from 35% to 20%. In conformity with the common ECOWAS tariff. But Customs is saying that their reduction was an error, and they will go back to 35%. They will continue to insist on a local tariff, obviously in disagreement or in disobedience to the common ECOWAS tariff. And the claiming agents are the customs unions, customs claiming agents are insisting that the reduction should take place. But let me tell you basically what happens. If you don't abide by the common ECOWAS tariff, you create problems. The problems you will create is that vehicles can go to Benin Republic, get cleared, get registered, and come across the country. Because given that there should be free movement of goods and personnel across the West African sub-region, vehicle owners can get what they call laissez-passer, which allows you to drive through the borders, and then you can drive from any of those West African countries in this country, and you are allowed to use your old vehicle, foreign vehicle number for a period of time, after which you'll find ways to change having registered locally. So those are the things. So we may end up forgoing revenue to our neighboring West African countries. That's one factor. But on the converse, we are also taking the risk of dumping if you keep to a low tariff. But I think what the government should do, which I know the government had done earlier, is to insist on the length or the longest period, or the period which a fairly used car cannot come in. What that means is that you can specify that a fairly used car which was manufactured more than 10 years ago should not come into the country, so that we don't have what we used to have in the 80s and early 90s, where relics that were called vehicles were now brought here and the country was serving as a dumping ground. So the government can specify the maximum age of a fairly used vehicle that can be admitted into the country, but we should conform and abide by the common ECOWAS tariff.
Interesting. Thanks for that clarity and explaining that to us, letting us really understand that. But let me also ask this question that some importers and exporters have also talked about, that the increasing incursion of the CBN into the trade policy space is an aberration according to them. Do you think that all of these policy issues around CBN trying to promote exports and all of that, part of it is the e-invoicing thing, which many also say is causing serious problems at the ports? What's your reaction to all of this?
I think we must recognize the fact that the executive arm of government has been not as active as one should expect. I want to use a very friendly words. They have not been as active as we would have expected them to be. So you realize that a number of things that should have come as a fiscal policy regime or trade policies of the government are not being addressed. And that leaves a vacuum, a lacuna, which it seems that the central bank steps in now and then to fill. We've had previous ministers of trade that were quite active in defining the trade policy of the country, defining the customs tariff of the country, and even updating those codes. But unfortunately, or interestingly, we seem to have the fiscal side of the government kind of taking a back seat, and that obviously may have compelled the monetary authorities to stay beyond their bounds to ensure that the economy continues to operate or continues to run. So in as much as one would accept that the central bank is obviously operating beyond its primary duties. But the question is that those roles, are they running head on? Are they running into the fiscal authorities for the positions? The answer is no, because the fiscal authorities have decided to kind of stay at the background or forego their positions or their roles and allow central bank to play those roles. So we must put that in that context.
So the e-invoicing thing and evaluation policy, I wanted a word from you on that.
Well, the e-invoicing thing is which the customs and excise of duty agents or customs agents are objecting to. I think it's something that probably the level of communication was not thorough enough as to convince them of the merit of it. But we should move towards that. The key concept is this: the world is moving towards automation. The invoicing is part of automation process, and I don't see any reason why the Ministry of Trade and the customs cannot convince the clearing agencies. I mean, they went for a long strike as a result of this e-invoicing. But I think it's in the interest of the country, it's in the interest of even the clearing agents that we have an automated clearing system. If we automate a lot of the processes, part of the bottlenecks we encounter in clearing goods will be eliminated. The toll gates that are instituted by some unscrupulous customs officers will also be eliminated if we minimize human interface in the process of clearing goods from the seaports.
Interesting stuff. Now, we identified overlapping regulatory issues, inadequate infrastructure, and all of this that we've talked about. Logistics. Another big one is access to the ports, which is a big elephant in the cupboard. We know what's been happening along the Apapa-Oshodi Expressway, thanks to some little innovation now from the private sector. But what impact do you think this is having on the movement of containers in particular now? There was a time we saw the report that even moving a container from outside the country into this country, moving from Lagos to maybe Ibadan or somewhere outside Lagos is even more than the amount you bring the container from China or anywhere it comes from. That's not the way to do business.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, when I spoke earlier, I said that in terms of infrastructure supply in the country, it's very weak. If you look at the Apapa seaports, and that's the seaport that receives the greatest share of Nigeria's import trade or import and export trade, you really would not be able to complete the rail line to take goods from either Tinkan or from the Papa Wharf to the hinterland of the mainland, which ordinarily in other countries you should have that. The standard gauge rate is supposed to terminate at the seaport. I don't think that is working. In the past, when the Europeans came here and built the rail line, if you recall, the old rail line, the narrow gauge rail line, actually terminated at Apapa seaport. At that point in time, there was no Tinkan port. So in effect, there was an arrangement to take goods from any part of the country to the seaport for export, also take goods out of the seaport through the rail, through the trains to where they were needed. But unfortunately, we are ran down that train system, and we are building us without concluding it. The roads are horrible. To the charge, what they charge to move a container from Apapa seaport or Tinkan Island to the mainland or any part of the country is so much compared to what would obtain successful in the world. And I have also said that there's no reason why Nigeria will still be mounting the issue of deep sea ports. There are areas in this country where we have natural deep sea port. There is Baka in Akwa Ibom State. There is Bonny in River State. In fact, some parts of Bayelsa, like Brass, you can actually have deep sea port. The Ekpe area has provisions, natural deep sea port. But we've been mounting it for years, and we'll not be able to do this deep sea port. If you go to neighboring countries like Ivory Coast, they have deep sea ports, and that makes creates some higher level of efficiency in terms of evacuation of goods that are imported into the country. It also allows for large vessels to come into their ports, to visit their ports and discharge goods. And such large vessels actually charge lower because of economies of scale. But no, we don't have those things. And we still, added to that, we can't even do the roads and the rail lines that can take goods out of the seaports.
Almost finally, we also move petroleum products from this seaports, and we've seen what's happened with regard to this. I'm thinking about domesticating the distribution, particularly now of PMS. How possible is that? Maybe using other seaports available. They are not as utilized the way the Lagos port is being concentrated on. And I think that's also why we have this so much pressure. Mr. Chukwu, can you explain to us how we can take advantage of other ports, the Onne ports and all others that we have?
You know, for petroleum products or waste products, it's a bit more complex than containerized
because
goods.
Of the depots.
Yes, you must have depots that the products must be pumped into, and they can be done with evacuated from the depot. In Lagos, you have majority depot. There are also depots in Warri, in Ogara, in Calabar, in Port Harcourt, and even in Oron, where we have our own depot. So, but the key thing is that you have to recognize that more than 40% of petroleum product consumption in the country takes place in Lagos. So that naturally created a market for many of these depots. But the most important thing we must recognize, also must not fail to understand, is that, look, the pipelines are not working. In the past, when the products are pumped from Mosimi to different depots in the mainland, in up-country locations, Abuja, Enugu, whatever, call them Kaduna. But unfortunately, those pipelines have now been breached repeatedly and they're not working. So we are now left with discharging to the depots around the sea, around the wharf, and then trucking those products to the up-country states, unlike what we used to have. So if we have the improvement in security in the country and we can repair those pipelines, we don't need to have those depots. There are already receptacles or storage facilities in many locations outside of the seaports or the wharf areas, but they have become moribund because you cannot pump petroleum products to any of those locations. If you may remember that, look, the Port Harcourt refinery was getting crude products from River State straight to Port Harcourt, to Kaduna, but that has been breached, so you can't even pump even crude to Kaduna, talk less of pumping refined petroleum products. So we have multiple challenges when it comes to logistic infrastructure, including the pipeline that's actually evacuates the refined petroleum products.
Finally, before I let you go now, Mr. Chukwu, I was just thinking that all of this delay, tariffs, and all of these issues we've talked about are part of the reasons why many would like to go to neighboring ports to bring in products and one way or the other smuggle them into the country. What's the impact on trade in our country if we look at what this means for trade, not having seamless port activities and all of that? How does it impact trade?
Well, it's a major bottleneck to trade activities. You have rightly pointed out the fact that neighboring countries are taking up the slack that we have, in the sense that they now provide service. If you go to a place like Benin Republic, I believe more than 90% of the imports coming to Benin Republic are actually made for the Nigerian market. And the greater concern will actually be when the African Continental Free Trade Agreement becomes effectively implemented. You will realize that businesses are going to set up in neighboring countries that are contiguous to Nigeria, targeting the Nigerian market because of our inclement business environment. And that's when we will begin to feel the impact more, because not just that trade activities will actually exit from our society, we are going to see a situation where labor, employment will also exit from us and move to our neighboring countries if we don't begin to address some of these issues we've highlighted.
I must thank you so very much, Chief Executive Officer, Carry Assets Management Limited, Mr. Johnson Chukwu. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us on the program today. We really do appreciate this.
My pleasure.